Hello, everyone. Welcome to Lecture 10, which is on symbolic interactionism. Now, so far, with the exception of Du Bois, we've been reading people who are coming out of the European context, so either Germany or France. Part of what will make symbolic interactionism different for us and unique in comparison to the stuff that we've read so far is that it's largely an American tradition. Most of the founders of this tradition were working in the American context. Now, we'll see that they are drawing influences from both Weber and Simmel, so there are still ties to other social theories around the world. But nevertheless, because this theory was developed in the American context and was influenced by some things that were other things that were going on in America, it has a little bit of a different flavor than some of the theories that we've looked at so far. Now, symbolic interaction is often referred to as the Chicago School of Sociology, and that's because many of the people that founded this theoretical tradition were at the University of Chicago. Now, it's also worth noting that there is a Chicago School of Economics, and the Chicago School of Economics is very different than the Chicago School of Sociology. Chicago School of Sociology refers to symbolic interactionism. The Chicago School of Economics refers to a very libertarian, free market, laissez-faire form of economics and forms of capitalism. So if someone does say, if it refers to the Chicago School, it's important to clarify and understand, do they mean the Chicago School of Sociology or economics? Because again, they are very different. And if you end up taking my theories of capitalism class, we'll talk about the Chicago School of Economics there. Nevertheless, for us, symbolic interactionism largely developed at the University of Chicago, and that's why it's referred to as the Chicago School of Sociology. Now, one thing that's going to differentiate symbolic interactionism from some of the other theories that we've looked at is that it's influenced by another American tradition, a large American tradition, and this is the philosophy of pragmatism. Now, if you know anything about philosophy or have taken a philosophy class, you know that ever since philosophy has been around, one of the main questions that's asked is what is real? What is true? Right? And in many cases, this is the central question that philosophers ask. And we know there's a lot of debate about people in philosophy on what constitutes fundamental, what I will refer to as capital T, truth. To establish capital T truth, fundamental truth, that's a very high bar. And again, there's lots of disagreements about what would meet that standard of capital T truth and not. Pragmatism tackles this question of truth from a different angle. And it's not really worried about capital T truth. It's more worried about whether things work or not in practice. Is it workable? And if it's workable, then it's true or it's real. And I can give you an example of this. So I don't think it's being taught now, but for a long time in the philosophy department at Gettysburg College, there was a class on the philosophy of color. And so I'm assuming one of the questions that they would talk about is what constitutes the color red? And I'm guessing, I didn't take the class, but I'm guessing there are very, very different philosophical takes on what would be the real red, right? What constitutes the real red color, right? And maybe it's you could measure it in different ways, you could define it in different ways, and different philosophical traditions might approach this question of the true red in different ways. So they're trying to go after capital T truth. And that bar is very high of what constitutes capital T truth. So that's why there's a lot of debate about it. A pragmatist isn't worried about that capital T truth. They're more worried about whether our conception of red is shared between enough people that it allows an interaction to take place. In other words, does my conception of red correspond closely enough to your conception, even if they're not identical, for us to engage in an interaction? So, for example, if I say, hey, hand me that red object over there, that red shirt, and you go over and you get what I believe and I perceive to be the red shirt, and you hand it back to me, my conception of red and your conception of red were close enough and similar enough where you understood what I meant. I had a certain desired outcome. My words were enough for you to bring about that desired outcome. So the word red worked in this interaction. And from a pragmatic point of view, therefore, that's what counts. That's what matters. Therefore, our conceptions of red are shared enough in order for that to be true. Now, the reality is, if I'm looking at red and you're looking at red, we're probably not seeing the same thing because I'm red-green colorblind. And so even though I can see red, like I understand, right, that this up here is a shade of red, kind of like a pale red, maybe a pinkish red, I can see that it's red enough. I can see shades of red, but sometimes if there's something red and like a whole bunch of green, I can't pick it out. They kind of blend in together. Very pale colors can look very gray to me, and I can't differentiate between, say, something that was like really like something that was just tinted pink as opposed to something that was gray. I could have a hard time differentiating those, or even in some cases like very dark blue as opposed to something that's black. All right. So it's likely that when I look at something that's red, and you, if you're not colorblind, and you look at something that's red, that we are seeing different things. So we don't have a completely shared understanding of red, right? There's no, we're both not seeing the real red in this case. But if our understanding is close enough that allows our interactions to work out, then for all intents and purposes, we have a shared meaning. The meaning works, and therefore we can say, that we have a successful interaction. So we don't need, in order to interact, we don't need to completely share the same fundamental understanding of something. We don't need capital T truth in order for us to interact successfully. We just need enough of our understandings of things to be close enough that things will work out in practice. So if a symbol allows for joint action, right, I'm expecting you to do something, you do what I expect based off your understanding of what I'm looking for and the words that I'm using. If we're able to engage in joint action, then meaning is shared, and we can go off from there. So pragmatism, the question isn't what is true, but what works. And we'll see that Mead in particular draws from pragmatism when he starts thinking about social interactions. And we'll also see how Goffman picks up on this idea as well. All right, so that's some of the context of this theory. Now, in terms of the main headline of this theory, if you needed to kind of think of like a shorthand way to think of this theory, their slogan, their headline of symbolic interactionism is that meaning matters. These folks take meaning seriously, and they want to say meaning is the basis for basically everything that we do. So meaning matters to them. And what constitutes meaning then? Well, there's actually three things. There's how one understands one's actions. Right, so how do I understand what I'm doing? There's how others understand one's actions, so your understanding of my actions. And then third and most importantly for this theory, there is how one understands others' understandings of one's actions. So in other words, how do I think you are going to understand what I do? And it's this third part that is really the hallmark of symbolic interactionism, this third form of meaning. And largely what this theory wants to argue is that much of what we do is based on how we think other people are going to interpret our actions or not. So A&E talk about, when you're looking at the mirror and you say, oh yeah, I think I look good, what you really mean is that you think other people are going to think that you look good in a particular outfit or based on what you're wearing. So meaning is largely social in nature, or a big part of our understanding of the world is fundamentally social because we understand ourselves largely from the perspective of other people. All right, that's it for this first part of the lecture. What we'll do next is look at some of the premises upon which symbolic interactionism rests.